Welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. We are going to begin our discussion of what is philosophy. And I don't know, I'm going to try to keep these recordings to 20 minutes, around 20 minutes, so we may have to do more than one video on this topic because this was really going to get us into the meat of what this class is about, and I don't want to skimp. So what you should do is have your handout, and you should have read the handout at least 2 times. We'll go over the video. You might have to go over the video a couple times and then reread the handout. It should become clearer as you become familiar with the terms. You may have to look words up that are unfamiliar to you. I promise you, if you do the work to understand, you will bear the fruit of understanding, and that's the best kind of fruit, let me tell you. All right, so what is philosophy? Philosophy may be defined in terms of its several features. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 5 features of philosophy. The core question for this handout is, what are the 5 features of philosophy? And I want more detail. I want you to tell me, explain each. So if you were to give me just a snapshot of what each of these means, give me that in a sentence. And then I want you to be able to explain method, philosophy as a method, in more detail. So when I get there, I will show you what I mean. All right, so philosophy may be defined in terms of its several features. It is an area, it's an area of study. It's an attitude, a personal attitude. It is a method. Each discipline has a methodology. It is an application, and it is a system. So we're going to look at each of those. And I do want you to try to understand each of these before you move on to the next. So first, let's talk about philosophy as an area. So here is the summary statement of what you're going to learn. Area has to do with foundation and goal. So think about a foundation for a house, and the goal is where we're going. So foundation has to do with what holds it together. Goal has to do with where we're going. Philosophy deals with the most basic questions we can think about in each of its 3 branches. So the most basic questions, logically speaking. So these are the rock bottom questions that don't have questions that come after them. So in epistemology, we ask, how do I know? Okay, we've talked about that in the past video. Now let's explore some of the basic questions in epistemology. Is knowledge of basic things, and the basic things are about the existence and nature of God, human beings, and good and evil. Is knowledge of basic things possible? Now let me go back and explain why. Metaphysics has to do with what is real. And what is real has to do with, is there a God or not? So the existence of God or the non-existence of God is a metaphysics question. Once we've answered that question, we answer questions about human nature. Are humans created? Are humans evolved? Are humans a body? Are humans a soul? Are they both? Those questions of metaphysics are the most basic. Does God exist? What is a human being? And then if we can figure out what is a human being, we can figure out what is good for humans and what is evil for humans. Maybe there isn't a good and evil for humans, but that's a basic question. Now, the question in epistemology is knowledge possible of these things? Can we know whether there's a God or not? Can we know the nature of humans? Can we know good and evil for humans? Now, you may be saying no, but if you say no, I'm going to say, why not? Why do you think that? And if you say yes, I'm going to say, why? Why do you think that? How did you get your beliefs about these things? Is knowledge of basic things necessary? Do we need answers to whether God exists or not? What a human being is? What is good and evil for human beings? Right now we're talking a lot about justice. If justice is part of ethics, does justice assume what is good for humans? What is justice connected to what is good? And does it assume human nature? So these questions about social justice already assume these basic questions have been answered. So is knowledge of basic things necessary, Or is belief, based on what other people have said, testimony, good enough? So is knowledge of basic things necessary, or is belief good enough based on testimony, whether it's other people, your teachers, your parents, your rabbi, your imam, your pastor, your guru, the Bible? Is that good enough? Or do you want to have knowledge for yourself? Okay, so you should be at this point asking, I wonder what knowledge is then. Knowledge is not the same as belief. So what is knowledge? And then how is knowledge of basic things possible? If we're going to know whether there's a God or not, how would we know that? Is it by our senses, as in science? Can science tell us whether there's a God or not? Remember, science uses the empirical method. Empiricism is the epistemological position that says all of our knowledge is through the senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And if you can't see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, then we can't know it. That's a position in philosophy. Science, contemporary science may assume that, but why should we go that way? Why should we believe that? Can we know by sense experience? Well, if God is a spirit and God is not sensible to the senses, then maybe we can't know, or maybe that's not the way to know. Maybe sense experience doesn't give us knowledge. What about intuition? That gut feeling that we have. Is intuition a basis of knowledge? Sometimes people say in art, intuition helps us to know the feelings the art is portraying. What about morality? Can intuition tell us what is good and evil? Can we go just on our feelings? We tend to do that. One philosopher said we're living in an age of feeling right now. I want to push back on that. Maybe we are, but should we be? Should we be going by our feelings when it comes to good and evil? What if your feelings deceive you? What if your feelings are wrong? What if your feelings are conditioned by your beliefs and your beliefs are mistaken? What about religion? Maybe we should just go with what we feel is true in terms of metaphysics. I just know deep down inside that there is a God. Is that good enough? What about people who don't have that deep down inside feeling? So remember, we're asking, how is knowledge of basic things possible? Is it by science? Is it by religion? Is it by reason? Reason. Have you ever heard of reason? What is it? What is your preconceived notion of reason? What do you think it is? Write down your answer and come back to it next unit when we talk about reason. I'd like you to think about that. What do I think reason is right now at the beginning of this class? Write it down and let's compare notes later. So reason is the tool for doing philosophy. We're going to have to talk about reason. If you're interested, I did a whole podcast series on my YouTube channel on reason, on just the reason handout, in depth. So I encourage you to look at that 15-part series on reason. So is knowledge by science, by religion, or by reason? Maybe there's some other options we'll look at. So these are questions to raise your consciousness level. Think of my job as your teacher as a consciousness raising experience. I want you to become more conscious of what you know and what you don't know, and more consistent in what you believe and think, living that. And sometimes we have to change. That's the uncomfortable part about this class. Sometimes you have to change your opinion, change your mind, and that's okay. It's better to change your mind while you're young than later on in life. It's harder once things are cemented. Okay, so we're looking at epistemology, the basic questions of epistemology. How do I know? Is knowledge possible? Is it necessary? And is knowledge of basic things possible? And if so, how? Now, the basic questions of metaphysics. This is exciting stuff. We don't really talk about metaphysics much in our society anymore. And I'll give you a preview. It's because we've become very skeptical. Skepticism is the view that says knowledge is not possible. We can't have knowledge of basic things. So we don't talk about them. They're difficult topics. Sometimes metaphysics sounds a little bit like religion. It's not religion, but it has some of the same topics. So metaphysics, what ultimately exists? Now notice these big words, ontology and cosmology. Here's where I want you to take some notes because we're going to learn some basic terms that will continue for the rest of the semester. So ontology asks the question, is everything matter? Or does spirit also exist? Or is all spirit only? So now we're talking about matter and spirit. I feel like I want to write some notes up for you. I'm going to pause for a second so I can get some notes for you. Okay, I want you to know the definitions of these terms for the rest of the semester. So let's talk about matter. Matter is something that has size. Philosophers say it's extended and it is not conscious, self-aware. So think of atoms. Atoms have protons, electrons, neutrons. They have energy. They are physical. We could measure them. Things that are material are made of atoms, right? So matter has size and is not conscious. So think about an atom again. Are they self-aware? Are they a thinking thing? Probably not. Although you will encounter some philosophers in our class that propose that they are. We'll have to see. Okay, spirit is the opposite. Spirit has no size and is conscious. Where conscious is self-aware. So it's a thinking thing that's aware that it's a thinking thing. It also would have free will then, right? So matter and spirit. Two other concepts that are going to come up in metaphysics that I want you to know about is eternal, which is something that has no beginning and no end. So it is always. Okay, always in the past, always in the future, always. The corollary concept to eternal is temporal. Temporal had a beginning, has a beginning. So it's not always. And there's another category of temporal I'm going to tell you about. It's called everlasting. Everlasting has a beginning, but has no end. It is forever in one direction. Now, I'm bringing that up because some of the views that we're going to look at think that the soul, the human soul, the conscious part of humans, is forever after it comes into existence. Now, I want you to know these terms because we're going to be talking about them for the rest of the semester. So matter has size, it is not conscious. Spirit has no size and is conscious. Notice they're opposites of each other. Eternal has no beginning and no end. It's always. Temporal has a beginning. It's not always. And it may be everlasting or it may not be everlasting. Some things, maybe like this pencil. It had a beginning, and I'm thinking it's going to have an end. Okay, those are terms that are related to what we're talking about in ontology. So if you go back to the handout, ontology is asking, is everything matter, having size? Or does spirit, something with no size and consciousness, also exist? Or is all spirit only? So remember, we're asking the question, what ultimately exists? Where did everything come from? What is the rock bottom nature of reality? Cosmology is going to address the question, is everything eternal? Is everything forever in some form or other? Or is only something eternal, like God perhaps? Or maybe nothing is eternal. So metaphysics is going to ask questions about matter and spirit, temporal and eternal. And we'll find out as we go through metaphysics that there are only so many combinations of those four concepts. Maybe matter is eternal. That's going to be called material monism. We'll look at that view. One thing, monism, mono, one, matter. One thing is eternal and it's matter. Spiritual monism is another view we're going to look at. One thing is eternal, and it's spirit. There is no matter. What appears to be material is only an illusion. Then we'll look at dualism. Two things. Matter is eternal, and spirit's eternal. Those are the various options of putting matter and spirit and eternal together. Then we'll look at the contradictory view that says not everything is eternal. Only some things are eternal, and that's God. Everything else is temporal. Those are our options in metaphysics. There may be a couple logically possible worlds we could look at, or there may be Buddhism we could look at, which says there is no thing that's eternal, just a process. So we will look at the options when we get to metaphysics. That's the basic questions, though. Is everything matter, or does spirit also exist, or is all spirit? Is everything eternal, or are only some things eternal? That's what we're going to spend maybe half of our class discussing. And then the basic questions of ethics. This is usually what students want to do right now. They want to just jump to ethics. It's so practical. It's, you know, it's more meaningful. But you can't do ethics until you've answered the questions of metaphysics. And you can't do metaphysics unless you've found a way of knowing in epistemology. So there's an order. And we're going to find that there's an order to doing things in philosophy, a method. So the question of ethics, what ought I to do? Now, this is exciting stuff. Is there an end in itself? Do you know what an end is? An end is like a goal. Is there a goal of all goals? Is there an end in itself? Something to be sought for its own sake, a highest good, a goal of life. This is also the thing that gives meaning to life. So some students want to take philosophy class because they're looking for the meaning of life. What is it? Why am I here? Well, that's what we do in ethics. So think of the end in itself. The end is the goal. The end in itself, the summum bonum, is the goal of all goals. What is that? Can we know it? And how would we know it? You might want to start exploring that question for yourself by asking, why do I do the things that I do? For example, why did you take this class? You could have taken another class. Maybe you needed a humanities class. But why go to college? Why get out of bed every morning? Why put on clothes, right? So we do this. We do act in the world, and our actions show we choose things, and choice assumes we value things, and values assume we have a highest value, and that highest value is the good. So everyone has a view of the good. Remember, my job is to help you to become more conscious of your own view of the good and more consistent in living it. Maybe our view of the good doesn't make sense. Maybe we inherited it from others. Maybe we need to figure it out for ourselves. So is there a good? First of all, some people are going to say, no, what's good for you is good for you. What's good for me is good for me. There's no highest good. Just do what makes you happy, whatever that is, right? Well, ethics, if I were an ethics teacher, what would I teach? What content would I teach? If they're just, you know, what's good for you is good for you and what's good for me is good for me. It would be like a cooking class maybe. I like chocolate ice cream. I like tacos. I like steak. What do you like? I like, I don't know, stealing things. I like murder, you know. So are ethical categories by nature universal? That's something that we rebel against now. We don't want to say that there are moral absolutes. So that leads us to the next question here. Is the good the same for all? Is the good for you the same as the good for me? I'm going to say it is, and you can argue with me about it. Ha ha ha. Let me be the jerk in your life that said the good for you is the same as the good for me. And now you should start by saying, what does that mean? What do you mean, Dr. Burton? Can the good be known? See, going back to epistemology. Is morality possible if basic things are not objectively clear? So if we can't know, period, then we can't talk about good and evil. We can't talk about justice or social justice. And if basic things about God and man and good and evil aren't clear to reason, then the good isn't going to be clear to reason, and there's no good life that we can talk about. And there's no source of unity for humans. And maybe that's why we see social problems right now. We see disunity in our society. Because it's a question about the good life. We haven't, as a society, settled the question, what is the good and what is the good life? And the good life is the common good for society. So do we have an answer to that? What is the common good for society? And social justice assumes justice, and justice assumes truth, and truth assumes goodness. So these are all concepts that have been connected in philosophy, and in our day they have been doubted and are being doubted, and things are falling apart. So we're going to have to see what happened, and can we get answers to those questions? Maybe we were using the wrong tools. Maybe we've thrown out the tools for doing philosophy and answering these questions. Okay, let's wrap up this section. Because philosophy deals with the basic questions based on general revelation, not any kind of religion, not any kind of religious texts, this is what's knowable to all people. Philosophy is basic to other disciplines. To other disciplines like sociology, anthropology, film studies. What other classes might you take? Biology, physics, computer engineering. Philosophy is basic to all of those because those disciplines have assumed answers to how do we know what is the good and what is real. Philosophy is basic to the sciences, to the arts, and to religions, which are based on special revelation. So religion is often based on some kind of scripture, which is not given to everyone. It's given to prophets and passed on in written form to those who believe. Philosophy may talk about some of the same topics religion does, but it's talking about them from a general revelation perspective, what everyone could know apart from special revelation or scripture. So you might feel like, hey, we talked about God in class. That's weird. That's what philosophy has traditionally talked about. What is ultimate reality like? And that's what religion assumes. Religion tends not to prove its assumptions, although some people in religions at the philosophical level have tried to do that. Religion tends to assume a view of reality and build on that. All right, now these questions are meant for you to go and ponder. Okay, so take some quiet time, turn off your music, maybe while you're washing dishes or driving you can think about them, but try to think about these. Are these questions of philosophy the most basic questions of all? Maybe you can think of some more basic questions. I challenge you to try. Does any discipline besides philosophy attempt to answer these questions? Think about other classes you have had. Have they attempted to give you answers to how do I know what is real, what is the good life? Must answers to the basic questions be known? Like, can we know them or can we just assume them? You know what assuming is, right? We just take it for granted. Now go ask your dad what is it to assume something. Let's see what he'll tell you. Is philosophy necessary as the foundation of all other disciplines? I'm going to say it is, and if philosophy is broken, all the other disciplines will be broken too. So, these are questions for you to chew on. I'm going to pause here because we've gone a little bit long in this first video, and then we'll connect with the rest of this handout. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.